Hi everyone, today we're going to be painting an alleyway cafe with some dappled light. The real-time tutorial is on my Patreon page. This is a shorter condensed version for YouTube. If you prefer to paint along with me in real time, then head over to my Patreon page where I have many more real-time tutorials on there. The reference image will be linked in the description. It's a copyright-free image that I found online. I did make a couple of changes to it, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but first let's go over my materials. I'm using a cold pressed watercolor paper that's 300 GSM, and the gouache I'm using is just various brands of artist grade gouache that have been squeezed out into an airtight palette. I've picked out a couple of brushes. These are all synthetic brushes. I ended up mostly just using the 1/2 inch angle brush, which is my go-to brush for most paintings, and I encourage you to experiment with different brushes, different brush shapes to see what works for you. You'll see that on my paper I have gridded out some lines, and I've done the same on the reference photo, and I just find that it helps a lot to get the drawing to be more accurate and to get the perspective of this scene. I like to spend a little more time on the drawing because it helps me to feel more comfortable when I start painting, that I don't have to worry as much about placement, even though as I'm painting I am always drawing with every brush mark I make. But if I get a solid pencil drawing in first and then I lighten the line so it's not too dark, then I feel more comfortable going in with paint and blocking in those shapes that I've laid down with my pencil. So some of the changes I made to the reference was I just adjusted where the dappled light was and reduced some contrast in some areas. If you just go to the link, you'll find the original reference and you can compare that to the reference image that I have up on screen. So to start off with, I'm going to block in the shape of the tree, and I'm starting with a dark color, just mixing up some blue and yellow and adding a little bit of red just to tone down that color. And I'm trying to block in the large shapes. So when it comes to painting a scene like this, which can look complicated and scattered, I squint down at the reference image and try to see the large shapes. And the theme of this painting is painting abstractly, so I'm trying to lay down abstract shapes that convey what is happening in the scene. And as long as I get the shape right and the value right and the color temperature right, then this scene should be able to read well. It's more of a loose impressionistic scene. I'm not rendering out the trees and each leaf. I'm just laying down shapes that tell the story of what's happening there, and it's a way for me to digest and simplify the information that is presented to me and to turn it into a simple painting. So after blocking in the tree shape, I'm blocking in the umbrellas. You'll see that I'm starting with the darker shadow shapes first. To mix the color for the tree, I'm just mixing some ultramarine blue and burnt umber, a little bit of orange or a warm yellow, and blocking in those shapes. And then I'm blocking in that orange wall that's also in shadow, and just using some blue and orange and some white. So it's quite a muted down desaturated color. And my goal here is just to cover all of the white of the paper to begin with, so I can start to judge the value relationships. And in my second pass, I'll come back and readjust them and add more details on top of the larger shape. And now I'm mixing up some ultramarine blue, burnt umber, and some white just to block in the ground. I add a little bit of warm yellow or orange into the ground for some areas where there's a little bit more warmth in it. And I will come back at the end and paint in the shapes of dappled light. For now, I'm just painting over those areas. And as I go back in space, I really want to squint down at the reference image and just paint the abstract shapes I see. So there's a sunlit tree in the background, and I'm just placing that in as a shape, and then some of the shadowed areas as well. Then also poking in some sky holes. I've cleaned my palette, so I have some fresh mixing space, and I'm just going to fill in some of those colors from the building in the distance. And now I'm going to paint in the light that's hitting that wall on the right side. And I've just mixed white with some yellow and red. And I'm using the gouache in a really thick consistency and really layering on that thick white or that thick light yellow color on top, and blocking in those buildings in the distance as well. Then I only have some small areas that I haven't yet filled in, which is the table and chairs. But as I'm painting it, I'm not thinking about chairs and tables. I'm thinking about abstract shapes of color and value. And I just mix burnt umber with some red, ultramarine blue, and fill in those dark shapes of the chairs and then the spaces in between. And then for the tables or the tablecloth, they are a cooler grey blue value, and they're fairly light. Even though they're in the shadow, they are a fairly light value, and that's okay just because the local color is quite light, but I don't want it to be so light that it competes with the light hitting on the wall on the right hand side. I add a little bit of red to it as well, so it's kind of a purpley blue grey color for the tablecloths, and then a darker mixture just for the shadow side, which is folding over. So now I have most of the paper covered, and it's much easier for me to judge the value relationships and whether I've painted anything too light and too dark. And the gouache that I laid down previously would be dry, so I can also judge if it dried lighter than what I needed. So the first thing I'm noticing is the wall in shadow needs to be darker in value, and I'm adding on some areas that are a little bit darker, so mixing more orange and burnt umber with a little bit of blue and painting in those areas. And then some things that I didn't paint previously, like the umbrella stand, I'm painting those in now with a darker value. I'm mixing some yellow with blue, and I want to paint on some of the lighter leaves. So some of the leaves are being hit by the sunlight, and I'm concentrating it around the areas closer to the light hitting the wall, because that is more of my focal area. So the umbrellas as well as the light hitting the wall, that is my area of interest, and that's where I want to draw your eye to. So I'm keeping most of the lighter leaves around there as well, trying not to make it look too scattered. Then I want to poke in just a few sky holes, so I mix some white with the primary cyan or cerulean, and I just poke in a couple of sky holes, but I don't want to overdo it, so try to keep them to a minimum. And I like to go in with a clean brush and just soften out some edges as well. Now I'm adding just a little bit more warmth and texture into the ground. So a little bit more reds and yellows into the ground, and then neutralizing it again with a little bit more blue-gray. Now I'm ready to paint on the dappled light that's hitting the ground, and here I'm using really thick gouache, and I'm dry brushing it on and then softening out some of the edges just with my finger or with a wet brush. And some of that dappled light is also hitting the umbrella, so I'm painting on a little bit of that. And then I want to go and improve the shapes in the distance. So painting in that little tree or bush that's on the right hand side, and then just adding some abstract impressionistic shapes in the distance so that your eye can travel out into the distance. And then coming in and refining the shapes of the chairs and table legs and darkening the value some more. I'm painting a couple more branches in the tree, making that value quite dark. So using red with burnt umber and ultramarine blue, and just adding in a few more branches. And then just some final touches to finish off the painting. So painting in that light that's on the right hand side, and not trying to render it with a small brush, but just using a smaller angle brush to paint in that shape. And that's about it for this painting. So I hope you enjoyed seeing the process for this painting. I try to keep it as loose as possible. That was my approach to tackling this image, is to think abstractly or to see abstract shapes and to lay those down and to just get the value relationships and the shapes in the correct places. So I hope that makes sense, and if you want to see the full real-time tutorial, it's over on my Patreon page. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in a future video.